Ambient noise, yeah.
So now you're grabbing some band lab clips.
Yeah.
Now for me, that would also be something where I would use like volume automation and like bring that from the bottom, like bring it in and then bring it back out.
And these are the kinds of sounds you can scratch. With this AI, like scratching it actually can be cool.
Oh, that was perfect for the interlude too.
Ends it right in the right
I
spot.
didn't even notice. 40. I didn't even realize the texture faded out at the interlude until it happened. I'm like, wait a minute.
Sometimes you just, it was just meant to be that way.
was meant to be that way.
It
Good to
was
see you again.
meant to be. How's everybody doing? What are you up to,
Good to
Tony?
see you again.
Another Thursday going around. Now, you got some Northern Lights the other night. That was fun, right?
Yeah, totally freaked me out. At first, I thought like there were aliens flying around.
Nice. It can definitely seem that way, right? I mean, it's quite a cool show.
Yeah, I've never seen anything like that. That was an amazing spectacle.
We'll have to catch it again sometime. Big solar storm caused that, so
If I had known it was going to be that clear and that good, I would have got the camera out there. I stumbled on it by accident.
exactly. But I'm glad you stumbled on it at all because definitely you don't want to miss that when it comes around.
Yeah. And
what else you got going on?
The last couple of weeks, man, I've been busy. The What the Genre contest, I joined that, and
exactly.
I got through round 1 with jazz, round 2 with metal, and managed to make it to round 3 for next week, which is going to be blues.
Nice. The blues.
So after playing around with the jazz and now getting ready for the blues, I realized I got to get more comfortable with extended chords and what different types of chords are useful in different genres. And I think I found some good information tonight to help me.
Awesome. Yeah, and for blues, like when I first started with just pure blues, it was for the bass lines, everything was very simple. Structure-wise, it was very simple. If everything was mostly just 12-bar blues and keeping it all pretty much in that same structure to keep everything nice and easy. But now you're talking about, some jazz as well, that there is also jazz blues. So, I mean, I don't know if that fits into what you're looking at here, but that would be
I actually considered making this a little jazzy just because you can merge jazz and blues pretty nice.
Yeah.
But I'm still recovering from my first jazz song.
Yeah, but that is just one where you would see a lot more of the extended chords, whereas in the blues themselves, you're pretty much sticking with some pretty basic stuff a lot of the time. You can do fancier stuff for sure at any time, and a lot of times it's even accidental stuff where you're holding a chord shape and you're just throwing extra notes in there, and you're not necessarily thinking about, oh, now that's a flat 7, now that's a this, now that's a 9, now that's a this. You're just thinking about going da 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 da, with a couple of different notes. But at the same time, what you're actually doing theory-wise, if you were to put it on paper, is it's this chord with a slash G, and then this chord and a sharp 11 over whatever. So it's about what it translates to. So that's where knowing the theory and being exposed to some of the theory is very important.
Yeah. One of the guys in the contest said, "Oh, just do 1 4 5. You'll be good." The blues.
That's the blues. Yeah. 1 4 5, 12-bar blues structure. And there's a couple different ways. You could do a quick turn blues where you go from the 1 to the 4 back to the 1, or you can do it in a regular style where you just start with the 1 and then you go to the 4 and then the 1 and then the 5. Yeah. And you can make it however you want, but in that standard structure, there's just so many songs that you can go back and listen to, and they all they're all the same style, but they all sound very different. They all have a lot of different, accent, different emphasis on how they make the blues in that same structure. So there's a lot of variation within the structure is the point.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to experiment with is like different kinds of bouncing. It's been a while since I've gotten the left-right bounce like that. So this should be fun.
And we talked about it. We're gonna dive into ragtime one day just to try to work that out and like really pump up that whole separation of the hands, because once that starts getting good and getting fast and getting fluid, that really opens up so much else with whenever on the piano. Just the other day I was with Jeff, cousin Jeff, the other day, and we're listening to a song and he's listening for the chords, and as he's listening to him, like if he hears like a C dominant, he's like okay, he hears it real quick and he's hits 4 or 7 real notes real fast to make sure that they all fit, just like a brum, brum. It's like rolling through each chord as it comes around and confirming that, okay, that's a this, that's an E flat this, and that's a that. So you can identify them just that quickly and just you hit them real quick, and it's either if it's right, it's right, and if it's wrong, like if you hit the major and it turns out you hear the minor, it's like, oh, it stands out at you right away. So usually that kind of thing jumps right out and makes it easy to see what's going on.
Yeah, and I'm gonna try to incorporate some ragtime into this. I got the honky tonk piano loaded, so
yeah, good start.
Yeah, I want to give it that old fashioned saloon kind of sound.
Nice with the creaky saloon doors, right?
Yeah.
Nice.
So let's see what we got lined up for tonight. It's funny. A couple weeks ago, we were looking at rhythm and different styles of rhythm, and David ended up being our starting video then because it was such a good explanation of different rhythm techniques. And I had to go back for starting out tonight because this was one of the best ones I found for an overall explanation of triads. And,
Nice.
That's what we're going to be basically talking about throughout the episode. But he's going to get us warmed up to every triad chord, quickly explained. He's always good at like getting a lot of information in there and in a little bit of time. And he's going to warm us up to the different triads that we're going to be looking at and how they relate with each other. That's going to be coming from David Bennett Piano.
Nice.
That's one of the best piano sites on YouTube. And
Great stuff.
He also works with Pianote, which is another one of my favorites for piano. That's my go-to.
Right. Very cool.
And before we jump into the actual chords that I want to look at, looking at it from a guitarist perspective, music theory for guitar is going to kind of consolidate all those chords. And he feels that there are really only 3 types of chords.
He's got a point, though, actually. And if I had to just, throw a guess out there, the ones that I would say would be the major, minor, and dominant, because you're not really using the diminished very often. And, by looking at those, you're looking at basically the 3rd and the 7th. If you're looking at 7th chords, you got a major 7, a minor 7, and a dominant 7, but you really don't use the minor major 7, where you would have a minor 3 and a major 7. That's the one combination of minor 3rd and major 7, or major 3rd and minor 7. Looking at the 3rds and 7s, the only combination we don't use very often is that minor 3rd, major 7. But
now, is that more because of how it sounds, or is it because of difficulty to
basically your
pull off?
Major 7 has that nice kind of a wistful kind of a sound. The minor, that's with the major 3rd and a major 7. If you go a minor 3rd, minor 7, it's got that nice solid minor sound. If you do the dominant, you're using the major 3rd and the flat 7, and that's giving you that Mixolydian feel. That's the dominant.
Holds on that last note.
Exactly. Because it's not quite expected, but it still has that. But then if you do the minor major 7, you don't hear that a lot.
That would be good for like a scene where you're trying to represent a little bit of confusion.
Something like that, yeah. But that's, again, of those 4 combinations, that's the 3rds and the 7s. And if you look at, major 3rd, major 7's all good. Minor 3rd, minor 7's all good. Major 3rd, minor 7, dominant, perfect. And the other one, the one that's left out, is that one. Major, minor 7. Or sorry, minor, major 7. But it is in use. You will find uses for it. As you said, it's got that sound that if you're looking for that sound, that's where you'll find it. But you won't use it very often in a song.
Yeah. That's the key to understanding some of these, is where they strategically get used.
Right. And of course, I could be off base on what he's going to go for the 3 kinds of chords, but to me, that's part of it. If you're, with guitar, there's also so many different kinds of claw, like we like to talk about, different hand positions, or, claw is a good way to put it, because, there's the C-shaped claw, or the G-shaped claw, or the E-shaped claw, or bar chords, looking at them that way. But if we're looking at just the theory side of it, then where it does translate better from instrument to instrument, and you're not just focusing on the guitar.
Yeah. So we're going to get a little perspective from the guitar side, and then we're going to get into some of the chords that I really wanted to understand more. Augmented,
Yep.
I think the most important one for me to understand. And these are fresh. We do have 2 freshy channels here. The last one, the Music Theory for Guitar, new channel. And this one gets a double header, because not only did he explain the augmented really well, he also explains the diminished as a complement to it. So write a song, nice new fresh channel. We're gonna cover what augmented chords are and where they're useful, and then we're gonna look at how to go from bland to brilliant with diminished chords.
Nice. Throwing it in there, yeah. Quick change, 7 to the 5.
And then I couldn't ignore sus chords.
Yep.
for piano, like this is one that I need a better understanding of as well. And another Freshy channel. This guy has some great piano examples, the way he shows it at home with music. We're going to witness the power of sus chords in action.
Nice. For me, the quick overview of the sus chords is just leaving out the 3 and you're putting in either a 4 or a 2. Would be a sus 2 chord would be you're putting in a 2 instead of a 3, and a sus 4 chord you're putting in a 4 instead of a 3. So that way you don't have to worry about whether it's major or minor because you're using a 4 or a 2 that's not on that 3. So if you're playing C, you want to go, that's a sus 4. And if you go back and forth from a sus 4 to a regular or a sus 2, it's a good way to move around.
Van Halen will go higher and higher. They start with that.
Yep, there you go. And that's what that is. And basically that's holding just the root and the 5, like in this case the C and the G. And then instead of that E in the middle, you're just leaving that E out and picking the second and fourth chord in that scale. So either the 2 or the 4, coming back to the 3.
See, now that's one that I do actually use a lot, but again, it's about associating what you're doing with what it's actually called.
Or if you see it on the page, knowing that if they say, C sus 4, they want, like, that's what they're looking for, like just knowing to jump to that. And it doesn't have to be all, a whole lot of theory, but just the fact that you're leaving the 3 out means that you're not conflicting with major or minor per se. You're just hitting the root and the 5, and then either that 4 or that 2, depending on what you're doing with the sus, whether it's a 2 or a 4. So,
and then to finish it off, now this is a channel I've actually been to with mine, but it's new for our subscription, Wuchia.
Nice.
And, he used to do music theory in 5 minutes, but as you know, 5 minutes is not always enough time. So now
it turns into too many videos. Yeah.
Now he does them in about 10 to 15 minutes, but they're much more precise and detailed. And he's going to go into those really extended chords, the 9ths and the 11ths.
Excellent.
Which is one I hear you always talking about.
Yep. Indeed. We have a kind of an easier way to look at that. If you just look at that same C chord, you do that same C major 7, let's say. The 9, if you just keep going every other note, that's the 9, the 11, and the 13. And it turns out that's the D, the F, and the G from that C chord. And then you're using all 7 notes.
The 9th reintroduces the second of
the 2. Yep, the 9th is the 2, the D. The 11 is the same as the 4, and the 16.
So it's kind of like taking the augmented diminished approach, but at an extended level.
It's basically taking the even number notes, because you know how with all of our major and minor chords we're stacking thirds, right? So we're going root and then the 3rd and then the 5th, and those are from the root to the major 3rd is a major 3rd apart. From the major 3rd to the 5th is a minor 3rd apart. And then like we're stacking thirds to get where we are. But when we're going on, we stack another major 3rd to get up to here, and that gets us there, and then another minor 3rd, and then another minor 3rd to get there. So we've got the B, the D, and the F. The B is kind of that 7, and that's kind of your ticket to get into the extended chords. So you're gonna, you've got the root 3, 5, 7. You already got too many notes. So you're gonna start leaving some out at this point. So like you leave out the 5 maybe, but you keep the root, and then you go 3, 7, and 9, right? Or root 3, 7, 11, or root 3, 7, 13. Just by throwing those extra ones in there. But there are different ways you can do it. But the idea is that you're not going to try to play all of them. Like you're not going to try to play all 7 notes at the same time because it just sounds too busy. So you're going to be picking here and there as to what you want to emphasize.
It opens up your chord options and your progression approach.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's not introducing like doing that way. I didn't introduce any new notes to the C major scale. Like if we're, those were all white notes, and we just used every one of the white notes by having, every other white note from the C. And that way they're all there and we could use them all, but we wouldn't use them all at the same time is the idea.
Yeah. So let's get started with taking a look at chords in themselves and what different chords there are. David Bennett piano, gonna give us our explanation. An awesome instructor on YouTube. Not a new one for us. It seems like every time we have to explain something complex with theory, he's got the explanations.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. Definitely some great resource there.
at David Bennett Piano, and like I said, he works with a lot of other musical resources on YouTube, and this is one of the videos that is sponsored by Piano. Awesome site for pianists starting out, or even if you've been a long time piano player. I mean, I pick up a lot of new information doing it for over 30 years.
Yeah, I find I pick up on things that I missed along the way, or things just kind of make sense in a different way when you see it presented in a certain way. So it's good to reinforce material, even if you think it's something that you already know. I still watch videos just to see, I'll see things in a slightly different way, or make a new connection from the way it's presented.
Yeah. And if you go over to his YouTube channel, you can also see where his second YouTube channel is. He's like Nari Soul. Like, one channel is not enough.
One channel is not enough to contain them. Yeah.
Yeah, but he's got links to his Bandcamp, his Spotify, his Instagram, Patreon. Go, David.
Nice.
So we're going to get an explanation of every triad chord, and some of these are going to be more relevant to what we look at tonight, and some are pretty much common, like the major and minors. Not anything new, but taking them and extending them is where it gets interesting.
Exactly. And like Uni says, other members of the band could carry some of those notes when you're doing those extended notes as well, to try to get those extended scales in use. Depends on what notes the harmony singers are deciding to sing.
Yep. And we'll be turning on our chat, so any of you who want to join in on the chat over on YouTube, we'll have that up on the side.
Yep.
This video is sponsored by Pianote. Stick around to find out how Pianote could help you put these triad chords to work. There are pretty much only 10 triad chords. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So in this video, we're going to go through all 10 of those chords, starting with the slightly more mainstream and commonly cited triads, and working our way through to some of the chunkier, grittier triads that we had at the end there. So let's start at the top with the classic chord that everyone knows, the major chord. C major triad, probably the most common chord across all of Western music. It is best described as the 1st degree of the major scale, the 3rd degree of the major scale, and the 5th degree of the major scale. And that is why we refer to these notes as the 3rd and the 5th, because they're the 3rd and 5th degrees of the scale. And this note is referred to as the root, because it is the note from which we are building the chord. So that's the major triad. If we take the 3rd in the middle and lower it, we get the minor triad, probably the 2nd most common chord in Western music. So once again, we have the 5th of the major scale or minor scale, same 5th in both scales. The root, only difference is the 3rd, has been lowered, so we now have a flat 3rd compared to the major scale. If we then also lowered the 5th down, we get a diminished triad. A diminished triad is just a minor triad, but with the 5th lowered, or diminished. The gap between the root note and the 5th has been made smaller. It has diminished, hence diminished triad. And although they have a slightly unusual, maybe even spooky sound, they are still very common, particularly in styles of music like jazz or classical music, but you can find them in pop music as well. If we go back to our major triad, C major, and this time we take the 5th and we raise it up like that, we get an augmented triad. So this time the 5th, the gap between the root and the 5th degree of the scale, has been made wider. It's been augmented. So we call it an augmented triad. And augmented triad, similar to a diminished triad, has a slightly less stable, pleasing sound as the major or minor chord, but it's still a very useful chord and does get used in a whole range of music. Many pop songs do use an augmented triad. So those 4 chords we've just had, the major, the minor, the diminished, and the augmented, they're the 4 main types of triad, and by more conventional conservative definitions, they are the only triads, because some people add to the definition of a triad not just that it's a chord with 3 notes, but a chord made from thirds by stacking thirds. There's 2 types of third: a major third, which is effectively 4 semitones, 1, 2, 3, 4, or a minor third, which is effectively 3 semitones. 1, 2, 3. So if we're limiting the definition of triad to chords built from thirds and also only have 3 notes, there are only 4 possible triads. A major triad, which is a major third with a minor third on top. We could have a minor triad, which is the opposite. It's a minor third with the major third on top, so the other way around. We could have the diminished triad, which is a minor third and then another minor third, minor third, minor third. And we could have the augmented triad, which is a major third with a major third. So you can see augmented and diminished have this sort of sense of symmetry as well. So those are the 4 triads if we're using that more conservative definition. And they're definitely the most common, the most sort of fundamental triads. But if we're using a slightly broader definition of triad, that it's a chord that has 3 notes in it, then we can access a wider palette of triads. For example, these chords. These 2 chords are called suspended. They are the sus chords. sus4, which is sometimes just referred to as sus, and sus2. Now they're both called suspended because the third that's usually in the middle of the chord, be it a major third or a minor third, with a suspended chord, that third has been suspended up or down, most commonly up to the 4th note of the scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, hence sus4. And it's suspended because we feel this sense of it wanting to resolve back down. It's suspended in the air and eventually we allow it to land again. We can do the same thing by moving the third down onto the 2nd degree of the scale. And once again, we get that resolution when it resolves back. But with the sus2, it's a slightly less satisfying movement. So by the end of this video, you're going to know every type of triad chord. But if you're new to the piano, you might not be that sure on how to turn these chords into an actual piano part. And for that, I would recommend Pianote's course on piano arrangement. For example, in lesson 5, Summer shows you how you can apply the Alberti bass pattern to any triad chords to turn them into a left-hand accompaniment part.
F sharp, A, and then A major is A, E, C sharp, E.
Remember, you can try piano out for free for 30 days with the link in the description. And when you sign up to the trial, you're directly helping the channel. Thanks very much. So those could be considered triads because they are 3-note chords, sus4 and sus2. But there's another group of chords you could describe as modal chords, which are also technically triads. And these chords are the Lydian triad, the Phrygian triad, and the Locrian or Locrian triad. So let's look at these chords. So we just had sus4. But what would happen if we didn't have sus4, but sus sharp 4? So rather than having this F natural, we had F sharp. Well, that is what some people refer to as a Lydian triad. That name isn't as commonly used. Some people would just refer to this chord perhaps as something like add sharp 4 or something along those lines, but you will sometimes see it referred to as Lydian and even maybe labelled with LYD as a little nod to that name. And the reason we're referring to it as Lydian is because that note that's giving it all the character, the sharp 4, is the note we get in the Lydian scale. The Lydian scale is exactly the same as the major scale, but the 4th degree has been raised up onto that sharp 4. Like that. So we call it a Lydian triad because within that chord, we're sort of getting that Lydian sound in a way. We're getting that Lydian note. And the same logic applies to the Phrygian triad. So a minute ago we had sus2, but what if we had sus flat 2, like that? We could refer to that as a Phrygian triad. And Phrygian, for the same reason the other one was called Lydian, the sort of distinctive note of the Phrygian scale is its lowered 2nd degree. That's what gives us the Phrygian sound. So a chord like this can be referred to as a Phrygian triad. And there is one more sort of modal triad, and that is this one. The Locrian triad. Don't know if I've ever actually seen one of these in the wild, but they exist, I guess. This is effectively a diminished chord, but with the third in the middle lowered down onto the flat second degree. And we're calling it a Locrian triad because Locrian, like Phrygian, has the lowered second, but Locrian also has a lowered fifth. The fifth comes down from here to there, and that gives Locrian its distinctive sound. So we can refer to that as a Locrian triad. If anyone can find a song that actually uses that triad, I'd be very impressed, but there we go, that's the triad. Now, as you may have noticed, these three modal triads do sound quite sort of janky and unusual, but that doesn't mean we can't use them. And actually, all three of them do occur diatonically, naturally in the major key. The Lydian triad can be built diatonically on the 4th degree of the scale. The Phrygian triad can be built diatonically on the 3rd degree of the scale. And the Locrian triad can be built diatonically on the 7th degree of the scale. And what you may have noticed, in fact, is those degrees where we can build the chord diatonically correspond to the degree on which that mode is usually made. So the Lydian mode is the 4th mode of the major scale, and we can find the Lydian triad on the 4th degree of the major scale. Phrygian is the 3rd mode of the major scale, and we can make the Phrygian triad on the 3rd degree of the scale. And Locrian is the 7th mode, and we can make the Locrian triad on the 7th degree. And there's basically just one more triad that I've not mentioned here, one sort of odd one out, but completes our list. And that's if we took a major chord and lowered the 5th. So earlier we had a major chord and we raised the 5th to get the augmented triad. But what if we lowered it? Well, that would simply be called a major flat 5 chord, because that's literally what it is. It's a major chord with the 5th degree flattened. And in fact, this also kind of gets a Lydian sound. We were talking about the Lydian triad earlier. And although here we're referring to this degree as the flat 5, it's, for all intents and purposes, really also a sharp 4. So we are kind of getting that Lydian sound again because we've got notes very typical of the Lydian scale. So those are the 10 triads that we can effectively have. But there's a few more sort of triad-esque chords that you might think, wait, why didn't you talk about that one? Why didn't you talk about that one? For example, what if I had this chord? You might think, well, yeah, why can't that be a triad? Couldn't that be like a C sus2 flat 5, right? Maybe. And I can see your argument, but most people would actually describe that as a D7 omitting the 5, so no 5th. Typically speaking, in chords that have more than 3 notes, so like a 7 chord that has 4 notes, you can conventionally skip the 5th to reduce it to a 3-note form, and that is sort of what that is. So if that is a triad, I guess it is a D7 triad, but I've never really heard anyone refer to it as that. Likewise for if we took a minor chord like this and raised the 5th, like that. Because of course we've already had this chord, the minor chord with the lowered 5th, that's the diminished triad. But if we had the minor chord with the raised 5th, is that not a triad? Well, it is a triad, but it's an inversion of a triad we've already dealt with. If I move the A flat from the top to the bottom, we can see it's just an A flat major chord that was inverted. So we've already covered that, right? We've already covered major triads, so that's not a distinctive, unique type of triad. It just looks a bit different because we're inverted. So really, based on the conventions of how we name chords, there are only really 10 unique triads. Even if we went with something like that, so that's got 3 notes, why can't that be a triad? Well, at that point, we're looking at why we name chords in the first place. That is probably best referred to as a cluster, a note cluster. Because although if you look up the definition of a chord, people will generally say, oh, notes stacked together played simultaneously, which this is. There are hidden conventions to what we refer to as chords, usually meaning there has to be some element of there being a third and a fifth, right? So with all of the chords we had, even if it was quite heavily altered, we always had a third of some sort and a fifth of some sort. Even in our sort of Locrian chord, for example, we had a fifth, and although we didn't have a third, we could think of it as a suspended third down here. Yes, it's pushing the definition, but it's still within that definition. But when we get to this chord, a cluster, well, we really don't have a fifth anymore. We have a third with the second thrown in. So it's important to remember in these situations that chords are a construct. They are invented. They are a way of helping the musician label and understand and process harmony. Because that is obviously still harmony. That is still notes interacting with each other. No one's disputing that. It's definitely harmony, but is it a chord? Harmony occurs naturally, whilst chords are a construct created to try and help us understand harmony. And the last little caveat I'll give is, well, what about this triad? What would I call that chord? It's got 3 notes. Is it a triad? Is it not? Well, this is what you might call a quartal triad. All of the chords that we were looking at before fall into what we call tertiary harmony. Do you remember when I mentioned that they were all built from major or minor thirds? And even the sus chords were variations on those chords that were based on thirds. The sus4 was considered a variation of a major chord. So all of those chords we looked at, the 10 triads, more or less fall into what we call tertiary harmony. Harmony built from thirds. Third, tertiary, that's what the link is. But what if we built harmony instead from a different interval, fourths? There's a fourth, there's another fourth. That could be called a quartal triad. Someone might even refer to it as C quartal. So perhaps that is an 11th triad. But I think, to be honest, once we start getting into quartal harmony, what we label as triads starts to break down a bit. The whole Western chord labeling system that's developed over the last 200 or 300 years is based around the idea of tertiary harmony. So once you start using quartal harmony instead, you wind up with chords that don't really fit into our conventional naming scheme. So I'm going to leave you now by playing a piece where I get all 10 of those triads involved, all on the note of C. And remember, if you want access to loads of piano tutorials online for beginners, intermediates and advanced players, then do check out Pianote with a free trial. Thanks very much.
Love the way that was laid out.
A lot of chord knowledge. So
Very dense information.
1, 2, 3 is a cluster, technically.
Now,
1, 2, 5 is a sus chord.
Now, if I saw the 1, 2, 3, like he was talking about, to me, that is, like he was saying, the third between the root and the third, the root, the C and the E, and then that D I would put on top. And that makes it like you're adding a 9. So it's basically a root, major third, and the 9. But you're just bringing the 9 down into the middle. I've also heard it called crunch chords, where you're bringing all the notes of a spread out chord into a very small space. But you can spread it out to identify.
And it does feel crunchy when you hear it. It's got a lot of suspense, a lot of like, the clashing, depending on what you're writing, can really be effective. You look at horror music, like those clusters happen in horror music all the time.
Exactly. And that's one of the, identifying what that sound is and what emotion it brings up in you and where to use that strategically in music. It's not going to be in every song, but there are certainly places for it, as you said, whether it's horror or others, just an inflection point or something unexpected, popping up, you throw that in there and you're like, whoa. Or you can do it with the Phrygian version, that flat too. You can do either way.
That's certainly
good stuff though. I always like that.
It does open up a lot more options for where you can go with your progressions. When you start to recognize all these different chord types, your progressions have a lot more room to grow.
Right. And again, to me, it was like, even armed with all that knowledge doesn't mean I'm going to sit there and analyze if somebody's playing and they do a little, a little melody line in the middle of something. I don't have to analyze each and every, how that note interacts with that chord. But it's good to be able to analyze where if something's clashing, to be like, oh, that's clashing because we need to bring that down there, and then it's going to be fine. It's like just knowing why there's a problem and how to fix it, that kind of thing.
Yep. Yeah, great advice coming from David, and he's not lying. Like, his YouTube has a ton of piano resources. We keep finding answers to our questions when we go there.
Exactly. And it never hurts to pack more information in there. So keep learning every day.
At David Bennett Piano. Even if you're not a pianist, the channel is worth a visit.
Definitely. And a lot of it, again, because I started in piano, I like to relate everything back to the piano, even when I'm looking at a guitar or a bass thing. But I think it helps to just understand how the piano works and understanding that all the white notes are, if you play C major or A minor, that's all those white notes and you leave out the 5 black notes, you can see the relationship between the notes, how far apart octaves are. Like you get a good sense of how to do music on a piano with a keyboard. So it's good to have a keyboard handy if you can.
Yeah. And now we're going to look at it from a guitarist perspective. And
Nice.
He's got a different mentality. He's consolidated all those chords we just looked at into 3 categories. This one's coming from at Music Theory for Guitar, Freshy channel, musictheoryforguitar.com. He's got a mothership.
Nice.
And what he's going to talk about is why there are actually only 3 types of chords. He's going to narrow them down into 3 buckets.
Chord families. It's a good way to do it.
Well, it's good to actually simplify some of this in order to be able to soak it up. A lot of this can seem overwhelming. When David popped in, he's like, whoa, I'm confused already. I've been studying chords for decades, and it still confuses me until I get a good explanation, a good example, and something clicks. Like, many things clicked in that last video for me.
Exactly. That's a good thing. And like Uni mentioned a minute ago, this is why also so many guitar players play power chords a lot, because you can just play the root and the fifth, and that way you're not interfering with any thirds, you're not interfering with any sevenths or anything fancy. Just a root and a fifth almost always sounds good when you're just playing along, unless somebody goes and hits that diminished. I mean, that's and that's on them really, or an augmented. Why didn't you tell me?
Surprise.
That's on them. But we'll see what he thinks the 3 types of chords are for guitar. I'm interested. And again, whether it's probably not about the claw, it's more about the chord families, like we were saying, major families, minor family, dominant family, that kind of thing.
Yeah, their relationship to certain aspects.
Yep. And then there's the way to modify them on the guitar is just slight modifications to the claw. So rather than the E-shaped bar chord, it's the E-shaped bar chord, but move this finger here, like that kind of thing. So it's easy to modify those.
Well, let's see. Some music theory for guitar.
Mm.
3 types of chords.
Hello Internet, so nice to see you. I'm here today to tell you that there are only 3 kinds of chords. But no, not Tommaso, there are several kinds of chords. It's impossible to have only 3 kinds of chords. No, there are only 3 kinds of chords, but not Tommaso, there are too many. I mean, we have chords like major chords and minor chords, and 7 chords, dominant 7 chords, and major 7th chord, and 6th chord, and add 4 chords, and sus2 chord, sus4 chord, augmented chord, diminished 7th chord, half diminished 7th chord, quarter diminished 7th chord. No, I invented this last one to make sure you guys were paying attention. Haha. Anyway, yeah, it looks like there are a lot of kinds of chords, right? But they all fall in 3 groups, or at least, that's the theory. And these theories seem to work well with at least classical harmony and jazz harmony. Of course, like every theory in music theory, it does not have a universal application. You can always, if you search enough, find a weird combination of notes that will not fit in this theory. This theory exists because it classifies the most used chords in music. And indeed, to find the exception to this theory, you have to go and search. This kind of proves the validity of it. If you want to state this precisely, this is not a theory like in physics, that it's true 100% of the time, barring exception, because in physics there are exceptions too. But that's a good theory to get started in understanding all those chords that we have in music theory, and will cover the vast majority of music as long as you don't really go searching for trouble. Once you've learned it, go and search for trouble because it's fun, but before, to simplify your life, you can use what I'm going to explain right now. So there are only 3 kinds of chords, and in a moment I'm going to explain to you what are those 3 kinds of chords. But first, let's see why we're doing this, because dividing all chords, or at least 99.99% of chords, in 3 groups allow us to do several good things for us. The first thing is that it simplifies learning all those chords, because if you can classify a chord in category 1, 2, or 3, and you always play on chords in category 1 in a specific way, you always play chords in a category 2 in a specific way, and you always play chords in a category 3 in a specific way, this simplifies your learning a lot. Second, it allows you to understand substitution better, because most substitutions are inside this group, meaning that you can change a chord in category 1 with any other chord in category 1, you can change a chord in category 2 with any other chord in category 2, and so on and so forth. So it really makes it easier for us to understand substitution. Third, these help us also in ear training, because it's much easier to identify chords if you first identify in what group they are, and you can totally hear that. It's much easier to identify in what group the chords are, and then try to understand the details, or specifically what chord is that, rather than immediately trying to find what chord is that, at least at the beginning. So this is something that, while it's not true literally 100% of the time, it makes your life much easier. So what are the 3 groups? So we are going to divide practically all the chord in those 3 groups: major, minor, and dominant. We are going to define as major chords all chords that have or accept both a major 3rd and a major 7th. I'm going to explain what accept means in a moment. We're going to define as minor chords all chords that have or accept both a minor 3rd and a perfect 5th. And we are going to define as dominant chord all chords that have or accept a major 3rd and a minor 7th. That's the definition. But what does it mean when I say have or accept? Well, let's take the major chords. They need to have or accept major 3rd and major 7th. This means that if the chord contains both a major 3rd and a major 7th, it's major. Yay, we are done. That's a C major 7th with C, E, and B, with E being the major 3rd and B the major 7th. Easy. But what if I have a plain C major triad? Will this chord be a major chord or a dominant chord? Well, a major triad could be either a major chord or a dominant chord. Let's take the plain old C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and let's write all the triads in that. C, D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor, B diminished. If I also write all the sevenths in those chords, I have C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, G dominant 7, A minor 7, and B minor 7 flat 5. So as you see, the C triad and the F triad in the key of C major, or if you want, the 1 and the 4th, are major chords because they both accept a major 7th. Meaning that when I play the scale on top, I naturally play the major 7th. But the G major triad, the 5th, it's a dominant chord because when I play the scale on top, I naturally play the dominant 7, the F note, over this G major triad. So if I just play a G major triad out of nothing and I don't know it's in the C major scale, I can technically not classify it, but I can give a default ruling that it's a major chord. Simply because, to most ear, the major 7th is more agreeable than the dominant 7th. Your experience may be different. When this theory was invented, this was the case for the vast majority of people. But if I play the G major triad and I know I am in the key of C major because this G major triad is in a chord progression in C major, then this G major triad is a dominant chord, even if it doesn't contain the minor 7th, because in context, it's a dominant chord. Of course, this being the internet, a vast majority of you are now trying to find counterexamples of chords that would not fit this classification. And, always this being the internet, many of you are convinced you are succeeding. So for instance, I am pretty sure some of you are just telling me, but Tommaso, you just write a chord that does not fit this classification, and it's there. It's the B diminished chord. Oh well, joke's on you, because I've already published a video showing you how diminished chords are actually dominant chords in disguise, and I totally recommend you guys go and see it. Other people are just thinking about, what about suspended chord? Suspended second or suspended fourth chord could be major chord or minor chord, or even dominant chord. After all, a suspended fourth chord could be in many different places in a scale and could totally accept a major third or a minor third or a major 7 or a minor 7th. So it could be anything. Yes, that is exactly true. This is not a counterexample, this is just showing that some specific chord, just like the major triad, can fit more than one category depending on where we are in the scale and depending on the context. So all suspended fourth chord or suspended second chord could be major chords or minor chord or dominant chords in disguise, but they still be classified as one of those three. The same thing is going to happen with other strange structures like augmented chords. Augmented chords too can be classified in any one of those three as major, minor, or dominant. And indeed, let me show you. Let's say I have a C augmented chord, the notes are C, E, G sharp. Well, this could be classified as a major chord if I can put in a major 7th, so a B note. Or it could be classified as a dominant chord if it accepts a minor 7th. Technically, it can even be classified as a minor chord if I put it over a bass of A, so the notes are A, C, E, G sharp, because that would be an A minor major 7th. And with respect to the root of A, we'll have the minor 3rd C and the perfect 5th E. It's a technicality if you want, but it does happen in music. Now, why we are doing all this? Because if you have a long and very complex chord progression, and you want to play over this chord progression, or you want to substitute the chords in this chord progression, what you need to know is not so much if a specific chord contains a 6th or a major 7 or a sus2 or a sus4 or other things. What you need to know is that that chord is major. Once you know that your chord is major, you have very specific scales and note choices that will work on all major chords. If the chord is minor, you will have specific scale choices and note choices that will work over that minor chord. And if a chord is dominant, you have specific scale choices and note choices that will work great over the dominant chord. And the idea is that you can choose the scale, and the classification of major, minor, and dominant will give you specific set of scales to choose from that will work good, and the rest is up to your taste. In other words, this classification simplify your note choices and scale choices and substitution choices a lot. So it's really worth to learn it. Now, what I want you guys to do, your homework, if you choose to accept it, is pick a chord and then in the comment write down if you think this chord is major, minor, or dominant 7. And I'm gonna read your comment and then I'm gonna comment on that and or make videos on that to help you understand this classification. Now, if you want to use this classification, if you want to see how this is used, this classification is a big part of my course Master of the Modes, where I teach you how to play over chord progressions, because this distinction is how we go about choosing the correct scale to play every chord progression. So if you haven't seen it yet, go and check out my course Master of the Modes. Master of the Modes, it's not a book, and it will never be a book. It's a complete video course made by guitar players for guitar players that take you from zero to become an expert in using modes and scales. This course is for people who are not afraid to do some exercises. Theory is important, applying theory is more important, so the course is taught through exercises that you have to do, and the more you practice them, the better you become. If you have just a minute, check out Master of the Modes at the link on the top right. If you like these videos, smash on that like button, don't forget to subscribe and click on notification, otherwise YouTube will not let you know when I put up a new video. And if you have any idea, any feedback, any suggestions, please write them down in the comments. I love to read from you. This is Tommaso Zilio of musictheoryforguitar.com, and until next time, enjoy.
Oh, I could see how he broke them down to 3 now.
Yep. I was wondering about that. The minor 7, or the minor having the minor 3rd and the 5th makes sense, because that also leaves out the diminished in different category. So that's where that works out for me.
Yeah, and I like the way he worded some of that. Like we accept this in this structure. That's a good way to think about it. Like, it's not one of those like golden rules, but it's a philosophy.
Yep. And it's a way of basically auditioning a note. So, that C major triad, you're going to audition that major 7. Sounds great. Minor 7. Still sounds fine, but this is more of a dominant sound. So you got that. But, you can try out different notes to see how they sound in that context by having, the chord there for you.
Yeah. And I like that he emphasized substitution, because that's kind of what we're talking about here with these different extended chords.
Absolutely. And again, there's different ways that you could name things, but the naming convention usually just has things boiled down to a certain way to do it. And it's a convention. So it's not, it's not a law. More, it's a rule that can be broken, so you can call things different things. But the idea is to be able to communicate effectively what notes you want someone to play if you're writing the stuff down. So that helps if they can understand by context or by convention what you mean.
Yep. Great new channel, another guitar channel. And it's funny because I was mentioning to Uni, like, we're probably going to do another modal night. That's a topic that going to take a couple of nights to really go through, and seeing that he's got a book on it, I'm going to see if I can get my hands on some of that.
Exactly. And I know we've talked numerous times about Jake with the modes as well. He's got a modes poster that has a lot of good information on it. We've talked about several of the videos. That one was on Dorian, for example, just going into each mode specifically and having a video that really homes in on what makes that mode sound like that. How does it sound different than a regular major scale or different than a regular minor scale?
Yeah. If you can really wrap your head around the modes and really wrap your head around these chord substitutions and extensions, there's no limit to what you can write.
Absolutely. And even just understanding, like, just from the basis of like C major, like we were talking about, you could have C major, you could play stuff that's in D Dorian, you could play stuff that's in E Phrygian, you can play different runs in those modes because they all use the same notes. You're just starting and ending and emphasizing in a different place to get that slightly different sound. But if you have runs that you like to do in a certain position or a certain mode, you can use that mode in other contexts and it'll sound a little different, but it'll still be useful and allow you to do other things and make things that don't sound like everybody else, kind of.
Like Uni saying, he plays chords into 3 categories: minor, major, and places where I play a run.
There you go. That works. Perfect.
That was at Music Theory for Guitar on YouTube. He's also got the website musictheoryforguitar.com, and he's also over on Facebook and Twitter. Unified name.
Yep.
Great job. Nice fresh find.
And again, if you really get in trouble, then you just do like an ambiguous slide, and then end up somewhere and take a guess.
When in doubt, do the ambiguous slide.
It can save you, and do it nice and slow if you're really not sure. Like, about here, boom. End off where you're going to end. Write a song.
So speaking of Freshie channels, this is another one that I came across as I was searching, and another great YouTube channel about songwriting. Definitely going to revisit on one of our composition nights at Write a Song. And we're going to take a look at two of the chord structures that we've been looking at tonight. We're going to start with the augmented chords, which you said that's the fifth going to the fourth.
The five's going sharp. It's augmenting, adding to the chord, so it's making.
The five's going up.
Major third, and then another major third. So a major third to the E, and then a major third to the G sharp. So it gives you that sharp five. And to me, that sounds kind of alarming. That would like signal, instead of just a C major like you're expecting. It's like, whoa, what? Just jumps up with that sharp five. But as we said, we're going to probably look at the augmented, and then after that would be the diminished. So this would be the major third, and then the minor third, diminished, or half diminished, I should say. It was the minor with the flat. But first, augment.
So we'll see where they fit into your songwriting approach.
Mm-hmm.
You just heard a C augmented chord. Augmented chords are written in notation with a plus symbol next to the chord letter. You may also see them written with AUG or sharp 5 next to the chord letter. How do we construct the augmented chords? Chords are created by using notes from a scale. We will use the major scale, also known as the Ionian mode, for our point of reference in this video. Major chords are created with 3 notes, first, third, and fifth. To create an augmented chord, we take these 3 notes and raise the 5th note by half a step or a semitone. This gives us first, third, and sharp 5th. Let's clarify this with an example. The C major scale has the following notes: C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. To create a C major chord, we take the first, third, and 5th, which gives us C, E, and G. If we take the 5th note G and raise it by a half step, we get G sharp. C augmented therefore has the notes C, E, and G sharp. Let's have a listen to C major and C augmented played after one another to appreciate the difference. Augmented chords have an uncomfortable tension to them. They are neither major nor minor and have a strange awkwardness. Because of this, they are most often used as passing chords, leading the listener somewhere else. An interesting feature of the augmented chords is that they cannot be inverted. Inverting a major chord involves playing the 3rd or 5th note as the lowest note or root note instead of the 1st note. If we take the C augmented chord we heard earlier with the notes C, E, and G sharp, we can attempt 2 inversions. With the E as the lowest note, we get E, G sharp, and C. This is an E augmented chord. If we use G sharp as the lowest note, we get G sharp, C, and E, which is a G sharp augmented chord. So there are actually only 4 sets of notes that create augmented chords. These notes are always 2 whole steps or 4 half steps apart from one another. This symmetry defines the augmented chord. It is also worth knowing that minor chords cannot have an augmented/sharp 5th note. They simply become major chord first inversions. For example, C minor has the notes C, E flat/D sharp and G. If we raise the 5th by a semitone, we get C, E flat/D sharp and A flat/G sharp. This is the first inversion A flat/G sharp major chord. How do we use the augmented chords? As we saw earlier, the C augmented chord has a note in it from outside of the C major scale, so it isn't strictly in the key of C major. However, it has lots of applications in a major key, so we will use it in our C major key examples. One of the most popular ways to use the augmented chord is as the 5 chord. The 5 chord in a major key is often used to take us back to the 1 chord. The augmented chord provides a tenser sound on the 5 chord which really sounds like it wants to resolve, so when we move to the 1 chord, the resolution is strong and satisfying. This can also add surprise in a song that has the 5 to 1 change earlier and then in a later repeat uses 5 augmented to 1. Listen out for the 5 augmented chord at work in the second half of this progression. Before we move to the next chord progression, I'd like to thank you for choosing to watch this video. We rely on your kind support to keep the channel running. If you're able to help us, we now have channel memberships and super thanks available. These allow us to keep on making songwriting content that is available to everyone. Click on thanks and join below this video to find out more. The tension in the augmented sharp 5th note means that it wants to resolve up or down a half step. So the chord that follows the augmented chord should have a note in it that provides this movement. This introduces the idea of voice leading, where a particular note in a chord is leading us to a note in the next chord. It helps the listener anticipate the next chord. This is usually done in a stepwise motion, which anticipates a note a half step away. Here's a simple example of this using the 1 augmented chord. The sharp 5th note in C augmented is G sharp. The 3rd note of the 4 chord F major is A, so this provides our stepwise resolution. We will also use the 5 augmented chord again as well. This voice leading idea will shape a lot of the augmented chord progressions we create. In this next example, we use the root note of the 6th chord to resolve the augmented 1 chord. We then fall back down to the augmented chord. We can also use different chord types to achieve this same effect. In this example, we never move from the 1 chord. We use the augmented chord again, and this time introduce the major 6th chord. If you want more help with major 6th chords, check out the video in the description below. So our motion is from the 5th note in the 1 chord to the sharp 5th note in the 1 augmented chord, and then to the 6th note in the 1 major 6th chord. We then fall back down to the augmented chord again. If we return to the first progression we discussed, we can use this idea on the 5 chord. We will go from the major 5 to augmented, then to major 6th, and finally to dominant 7th. If you need help with dominant 7th chords, then we have a video in the description. Listen out for the extended stepwise movement in the second half of this progression. In the next chord progressions, we will use the flat 6, flat 7 and flat 3 chords. We have videos in the description which fully explain these chords. Despite using these new chords, our intention is the same, to produce stepwise voice leading with our progressions by using augmented chords. Listen out for this in the examples and see if you can work out what the notes are that are creating this effect in each chord. Check out the playlist on screen now for more chord progressions to use augmented chords with.
Ooh, those were some great examples.
Very cool. And again, sometimes they have that, when you get that augmented note, I like that little augmented walk from just taking the 5 and just going up one at a time. And then ending off with a 5, because that way you're basically walking up to the 3rd of the 5 when you get up there. So you're at the 1 at the beginning, and then the augmented, and then the 6. And then you're there. Nice.
Yeah, what was the first example? He augmented the 5th on the first one? That one?
Yeah, on that one, the one that was the walk. Mm-hmm. He was using an augmented in a different progression also, where he was using, in a C major context, he was using a G augmented, which has that D sharp in it. So that actually works out to be like a sharp 9, if you look at it from that way. But it's like, again, it always depends on the context. So I'd have to look back at the progression that he was putting it into to get the, what it was actually being called. Like this one was the C to the augmented to the add 6, and then that could be a G major. Just, as far as that walk, and then coming back to the C, because the idea is it's trying to pull back from that 5 back to the 1.
Yeah, as he was showing the different examples, it started to smooth out, and I was like, oh, yes, I do like what the augmented chord is bringing to the progression. Like Uni, the first thing I thought was Electric Light Orchestra, and
Yep.
then I started to hear a little Roy Orbison.
Exactly. Orbison was the other thought I had. And looking at the way the chords were represented, it reminded me of, I want to say it was Hook Theory when we looked at that website again, like the way that one of the chords had like, purple and red like slash lines through it. That's, visually jumps right out at you. And that's telling you, oh, that's not in the key. It's using notes that are not part of the home key. And that's why it looks that way. And it's like, having seen that before on a website like that, it's like, oh, you can see that right away. And, if they're using the regular chords, the 1, the 4, the 5, they're not only color coding them so they jump out at you very easily, but they're identifying them as, the 1, the major 4, the major 5. With one like that, it's flat 7, flat major 7, for example. So it's going to show like, flat and then capital 7, to get you that. But again, it's all about how it's displayed. And I like the way that they have the colors. I like the way that, it just gives you a good little example of coming around like that.
Oh, yeah.
Definition of augmented, Bobby, is a sharp 5. So instead of a C major, root 3 5 is root 3 sharp 5. That's what we're going into.
A little spice to the 5th.
A little sharper.
Well, I liked as the examples built up, the different approaches he took. It started to settle into me, like what he meant about like these are like passive chords. They're good for, getting a chord in there that kind of throws the listener off a little bit because, we're so used to hearing certain chords together. And when you do hear these, you feel like you're going somewhere and right. it moves the chord progression.
Exactly. The other thing that was cool about the augmented, like he was saying that you can't really invert the chords because once you invert it, you're just doing a different augmented chord because it just wraps around. So like the C, the C, E, G sharp and the E, G sharp C and G sharp C, E. It's the same 3 notes, but as you cycle through them, you're just changing the name. So it's C augmented and then it's E augmented and then it's G sharp augmented, but it's the same 3 notes, just moving on up. Same thing with the diminished. That's the one we're going to look at next. But with the diminished scale, it's the same idea where when you try to invert it and move your way up, you're actually just doing different diminished scales all the way up because you're just starting at a different note but playing the same 4 notes all the way up.
Now with the augmented, I felt like it was passive on the upswing. Like it was bringing the progression up.
In this case, it was the way he was using it. For sure, in the progression, because he was going from the sharp 5 to the 6. You can also go from the sharp 5 back to the sharp 5 and settle back down. Some cases he was going up and then back down. So from like a regular C to the augmented to a C6 to the augmented back to the C. You can just bounce that back and forth. And that's just moving that 5, up by a half step each time and then back down. And this, by definition, that's just, a C and then C augmented and then that C, I guess they would call that an add 6 or because you're using a root, a third, and just the 6.
So now I'm kind of curious as to if the augmented makes me feel like I'm rising in the progression, does the diminish make me feel like I'm lowering? The
diminished is really harsh the way I look at it, just because it's the minor third, a flat 5, and a double flat 7, which turns out to be that same 6, but it's not considered a 6. And if you just roll like the whole thing, that's like, those 4 notes, and then you're adding the C on the top. But it's those same notes, and as you move them up or down, as you try to move that up or down, you basically hear, missed the last one. But yeah, the fact that like if you play it fast on the guitar, because when you have that claw, you can just go from one spot and then slide up that right number of frets. You go from there to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. For diminished chords, it's every 4 frets. So you would just go from where you started because it's always minor thirds. These are all minor thirds apart. And that's how you make a diminished chord. For the augmented chord, it's all major thirds. And that's how those are broken apart.
I think I'd have an easier time with the major thirds.
Mm-hmm. Yep, because you're also only dealing with the with 3 notes per octave, as opposed to the diminished, you're dealing with 4 notes per octave. That's where it'll work out, because of the 12 notes, and then the major thirds and the minor thirds are either 3 semitones or 4 semitones. So you've either got 4 of them or you got 3 of them, and you still get to 12.
Well, let's see how we can go from bland to brilliant with diminished chords. This is a double header, also from @Write a Song over on YouTube.
Nice.
He got us both with the augmented and the diminished tonight.
And they're important. They're like 2 sides of the same coin, like I was saying with the they're both very symmetric, and we'll look at it sometime on the easy way to think about it is looking at a clock face, and there's the 12 positions on a clock, and then you think of those as the 12 semitones that you have on the piano. And if you just the augmented chords, you look at the position of the hands, it's going to be symmetrical. So no matter where you rotate it, it's always going to be that note, and that note in the same positions. And when you're doing a diminished chord, it's 4 notes that are always in the same position that are as you rotate it around. So it's another way of thinking about it, but just more of a visual way to see how the notes relate to each other.
We'll I really like how he shows it visually and with a good music example. This makes it a lot easier to learn and understand.
The examples are very, very helpful for sure.
Yep, that's why we picked 2 from you tonight. Write a Song.
Excellent.
What do you think is unique about this chord progression? It has a link that is missing from many chord progressions, which allows it to have a better flow. So in this video, I'm going to reveal what this missing link is, how it can be constructed in several ways, and how you can use it to bridge the gaps in your own chord progressions. One of the oldest structures created by humans are bridges. Built to span a physical obstacle, like a valley or river, modern life would be much more difficult without the use of bridges. And as a bridge can span different lengths, 2 notes in a chord can also span different distances. The distance between 2 notes in music is called an interval. Chords are just a series of intervals played together. For example, major chords are constructed with 2 third intervals, 1 major and 1 minor. A major third interval is 4 semitones or half steps. A minor third is 3 half steps. So to create a C major chord, you start on C, then count up 4 half steps and get to E. These are the 2 notes in your first major third interval. Then from E, count up 3 half steps, or a minor third, to G. This gives you the notes in the C major chord, C, E and G. 3-note chords are also known as triads. Whilst bridges are useful for a function in society, they can also be expensive to build. Sometimes you need to find a smaller gap to bridge to get the job done at the right price. But what happens if you want to create a smaller bridge in your chords? What if you use 2 minor third intervals? Let's start on C again and then count up 3 half steps. This gets you to E flat. Then from E flat, count up 3 half steps again, which takes you to G flat. C, E flat and G flat create a C diminished chord. Diminished chords feature naturally in major keys as the 7 chord, but they are the ugly duckling and are used the least of any of the major key chords. Part of the reason for this is the tension they create. It's not to everyone's taste, but this also opens up an opportunity for you as a songwriter and could be the missing link that your progressions need. You can use the diminished chord like a bridge for your progressions. It can work in a number of ways and in different locations depending on what you need. The traditional use of the 7 chord in major keys is as a dominant function chord, which leads strongly back to the tonic 1 chord. Listen to it at work in this example in the key of C major. Bridges can come in all sorts of types and designs, whether it's an arch, cantilever, suspension, or one of many other styles. Engineers have always looked for different ways to solve the same problem of spanning a distance. And like a bridge, your diminished chords can also come in different varieties. These include diminished 7th chords and half diminished chords, also known as minor 7 flat 5. These add a 4th note to the diminished triad. You can think of this like another span of intervals in the diminished bridge. Let's look again again at the C diminished chord with the notes C, E flat and G flat. If you count up 3 half steps, a minor third interval, from G flat you get to A. This creates a C diminished 7th chord. So the diminished 7th chord contains all minor third intervals. If you go back to the diminished chord, and this time count up a major third interval at the end, you get a different chord. Here's the C diminished chord again. Count up 4 half steps from G flat, and now you get to B flat. C, E flat, G flat and B flat create a C half diminished chord. These chords are also known as minor 7 flat 5. That's because you can also create them by taking the notes of the minor 7th chord and dropping the 5th note by half a step. So what's the point in these chords? Well, they add an extra flavour or interest to a progression. So you can just try them out where you use diminished chords and see what you think. They can also be used to accommodate certain notes in your melody if you are matching chords to a melody or vice versa. Let's have a listen to them as the 7 chord in the previous progression example. Please note that the B diminished 7 chord is not diatonic to the C major key as it uses the A flat note. If you want an easy to use guide with 7 simple songwriting keys, as well as 6 popular chord progressions, then head to majorkeychords.com and download your free copy today. Link is also in the description. Bridges can be used in lots of different situations in order to carry different types of traffic. You might have a simple footbridge that people can walk over, a strong bridge designed to carry a large highway, or even an iconic railway bridge. In a similar way, diminished chords can be used in several situations in your progressions to bridge different sorts of chord gaps. Previously, I showed you a diatonic major key example. These were in the key as the 7 chord. Where you get some more interesting and powerful examples is by using non-diatonic diminished chords from outside of the key. These really are the missing link, bridging your diatonic chords and tying them together in new and interesting ways. To think about this, look at the 7 notes in the C major scale: C, D, E, F, G, A and B. Each note is used as a root note for the 7 chords in the key of C major. But what about the 5 remaining notes? In this case, these are sharps or flats, also known as accidentals or the black keys on the piano. You can use these as root notes for diminished chords, and these diminished chords can become powerful bridges between the other chords in your major key chord progressions. You can go ahead and use these 5 diminished chords wherever you like, but you'll see some of them used more than others, and like a bridge, they are more effective when spanning certain gaps. Let's start with the diminished chord built on the flat 2nd or sharp 1st scale degree. In the key of C major, this would be C sharp diminished. This chord can be a useful bridge between the 1 chord and the 2 chord. It can also be referred to as the 7 of 2. Here's an example of this. You can also use the chord as an approach to the 2 chord, regardless of what is heard before it. The next popular use of this technique is with the diminished chord built on the flat 5th or sharp 4th scale degree. In the key of C major, this would be F sharp diminished. This chord is a nice bridge between 4 and 5. I'm going to turn to the guitar for the next example. Diminished chords can often be tricky to finger on the guitar. This is where one of the diminished chord varieties can be useful. I'm going to play a 1, 4, 7 of 5, 5 progression. In the key of C major, these chords would be C major, F sharp diminished, and G major. You can see that F sharp diminished would be a challenging chord to play on guitar, but if you play it as an F sharp half diminished chord, also known as F sharp minor 7 flat 5, then it is a bit easier. Here's how that sounds. Another common diminished bridge is between 5 and 6 chords. This is built from the flat 6th or sharp 5th scale degree. In the key of C major, this would be G sharp diminished. I'll use the very common, but not always loved, 1, 5, 6, 4 progression to demonstrate this. The diminished chord can also be written as 7 of 6. I'll play it as a diminished 7 chord on this occasion to hear how that sounds between the 5 chord G major and the 6 chord A minor. The remaining 2 diminished chords are not commonly used in popular music, but you will encounter them more in jazz, so feel free to experiment with them if you want to. Remember that any of these chords could be used as a simple approach to the relevant target chord. You don't always have to use them as a bridge. For example, look at this progression in the key of C major, where I use all 3 as quarter note approach chords to the A minor, D minor, and G chords. I'm going to put this all together now in a longer C major key example. You can see it on screen now. I'll play the 7 of 6 as a bridge between 5 and 6 in bar 2. Then in the final bar, I'll end the progression with the diminished 7, 7 of 5, moving into the dominant 7, 5 chord. Listen to how this brings a really strong pull back around to the 1 chord on repeat. I have to admit at this point that you might have just wasted your time. The thing is, everything I just told you is completely useless if you don't know how to create major key chord progressions. Watch the video on screen next to learn a really simple chord progression system.
Oop, did that cut off short?
Not sure.
Oh.
I thought it was break time in the middle because I like those progressions. And to make the point of, using the ones that he talked about, the flat 2 and the flat 6, like putting them in between, or just basically using the diminished chord on the note in between where you're trying to bridge across, just makes so much sense. And then it's just a matter of, getting comfortable with the fingerings on the different diminished chords, because I don't use them a lot in what I usually play. So just even throwing them in here and there.
I feel like I should use them more. His last example, when he went beyond bridging and just like kind of injecting them into the like quarter notes like that, that's like the Elton John or Billy Joel kind of technique.
Yeah, starting to get comfortable with those passing chords for sure.
It will definitely make your piano chords, if you're playing like that, sound fuller and fancier and more expression.
Nice. Love it.
Yeah, that was a great explanation, both on the augmented side and the diminished side. I have a new appreciation for the diminished chord after that.
Exactly. And again, there's different places to use it and places where it's most effective. And in this case, like those examples that he gave were excellent for those. Good places to use them and good ways to use them.
That last one really clicked in my brain. Like that's what I got to do more of. That's what I need to get more into my basic chord progressions.
And even if you're not going to use the full diminished, you could even just use those couple of notes, just knowing that if you want to go from the F to the G, know that you want to do something with that F sharp. And if it's an F sharp diminished, you could just go with a couple of the notes, You just go with 3 of them. You don't have to go the whole thing. So just something to be able to throw in there. And to start off with, just even that first note, going from like an F, knowing that you can do that little approach just from the root, or you can do the approach on the 3rd or the 5th. But it works most effectively on the root, I think.
I feel like that helps also on the melody side of writing, because hearing those chords like injected like that, like I'm thinking a totally different kind of singing approach and melody, and that can complement the melody that a singer comes up with, and a singer can complement that kind of chordal approach.
Indeed. Good stuff.
That's how Elton did it.
The secret's out. Oh no.
So that was at Write a Song. Awesome. New freshie. I will be back for more theory over here.
I'll be back.
Now we've got one more chord that's been mentioned, chord type, the sus, the suspended chords. This is the one that I'm most interested in implementing more. you showed us a little example earlier that reminded me of Van Halen. We'll
Yep.
fly higher, and Jump would be another one that kind of does that.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is, like, as you were mentioning before, the rising feel or the falling feel with the sus4, I feel like it's going, it's going up and kind of hanging out there, and you're kind of floating there, and then you come back down. With the sus2, you're kind of ducking under, right? So it's like you can use the sus4 and the sus2 in the middle of, if you have a whole long bar, let's say you're playing a slower paced song, so you have a long bar of C, and you can go from the C, you can go up and down under. You're using two of the notes that you wouldn't necessarily use a lot. That would technically be the 11 and the 9, like we were talking about before. The D and the F.
Don't get ahead of us. That's the next one.
Okay, so we'll call them the sus2 and sus4 now, because that's where they are, and that's how they're being used also. So it's good. It's good to talk about them as the sus4, because you're not using the 3, but you are using the 4 and the 2. If you were using it as a 9 or an 11, you would have the 3 in there, and you'd have them up here. So they'd be functioning differently. So it wouldn't quite sound the same.
See, and that really makes me want to bounce, that kind of sound, especially when you're jumping between like the second to the third or the fourth to the third.
Mm-hmm.
I want to bounce.
Yeah. And some people, they talk about encapsulating or, notes, or if you're trying to get to that C, for example, you're playing something in C major and you want to end on the C, you come in from wherever you could like go, just above, just below, and then right to it, trying to encapsulate or work around it, or, like trying to work a couple of notes into a little thing that just ends you off on the note you want to land on. So, some people just call it, fancying things up or doing a couple of things, just adding a little something different as you approach things or encapsulating things. A lot of times it's in the middle of the chord. Like, well, it's like you said, it's in the middle of the chord because you're with that root and the 5 on the outside, you're just holding those two. And then in the middle, you could have those two held with your thumb and your pinky, and you got 3 fingers in the middle and 3 notes in the middle. So it's like, okay, what do you want to do? And you can just play with all of them. Just mess around a little bit, and then,
Eddie Van Halen keyboard solo time.
Back and forth. I like
so it. This one's going to be coming from At Home with Music 8698, another freshie. We're on a roll tonight with the new channels.
Love it.
And we're going to witness the power of sus chords in action.
Nice.
And what I really like with this one is you really see it in action. He actually plays it there, and I love seeing these performed.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Welcome to At Home with Music. I'm Leon Olguin. In a previous video, I showed you sus chords. So for example, if we're in the key of C, and you start with a basic C major triad, you have the C sus4. There's a fourth between the C and the F. That's the note that we added when we suspended this E. We raised it half a step, it became these 3 notes, and it just needs to resolve back to the tonic. And then we looked at the sus2 chord, where you have a second between the root and the note that is the suspended note that resolves back to the third. They work in major and minor. Interestingly, and I don't know if I mentioned this in the last video, but the sus4 chord is more popular than sus2 because it has a stronger pull to the tonic. But this one works just as well. Now what I want to show you in this video is how you can slip the sus chords into common chord progressions. So we'll look at some of the most famous chord progressions, and I'll show you how you can add suspended chords into those progressions to make them sound even more interesting. Then I'll demonstrate how you can slip those sus chords into songs. And I'm going to use as my example some songs that I've used before, very famous songs, very simple songs. Everybody knows these tunes. And I'll show you how you can slip those sus chords in there to make them sound more interesting. And then finally, I'll show you a few examples of sus chords used in popular songs. And by the time we get through with this, when you start listening to popular music, you might start hearing those sus chords popping up, because they are definitely part of the chord vocabulary. So let's switch to the overhead camera, and then you can see how I can play these sus chords and add them to songs, add them to progressions, and so on. Okay, we can start with the 2-5-1 progression, which in the key of C, you remember, is D minor, G, C. Now we can make this even more interesting by adding sus chords. So D minor can become D sus, which resolves to D minor, G sus, which resolves to G, and C sus, which resolves, I keep wanting to say revolves, which resolves to C. We can also do this with sus2 chords. So you remember, if we just write something like D sus, it is assumed that that is a sus4, so you don't have to put the 4. But if we do a sus2 chord, you want to put that 2 in there to differentiate it from the sus4. So if we use sus2 chords, it has a little bit of a different flavor to it. Another famous progression that we've studied is the 1-5-6-4. And we can begin by putting sus chords at the beginning. C sus resolving to C, G sus resolving to G, A sus resolving to A minor, and then here, instead of using F sus, we're going to use F sus 2. And so it sounds like this. If we were to use F sus the other way, it would sound like that. That could be good too, depending on what you like. And we can play this in different voicings. So that's how you can slip the sus chords into these famous chord progressions, but let's see how we can do it using some familiar tunes. I'm going to use as my example here, Mary Had a Little Lamb, which I've used in several videos now, but I like to use this because it's very simple, very memorable, everybody knows this tune. Now, we originally played it just using 2 chords, C and G. Now we can make this more interesting by adding sus chords in some places that you might not normally think to put them. Watch what we can do here. That is G7 sus, only the notes have been rearranged. If we play it in root position, all with one hand, that's what it would sound like, and it resolves to G7. But we've taken the notes here and we've moved them down. Same 4 notes, they're just arranged differently now. They're voiced differently. And it just so happens that C is the tune. And it can resolve from G sus, G7 sus, I should say, to G7 and then back to C. And we can do the same thing here. And then here, we can just use a straight G sus to G, G7 sus, G7, and then here, we can do something fancy with A sus 2 we can use, or just A sus. And then here, we can use that G7 sus chord, and we have E in the melody. So we get this very interesting, slightly dissonant chord that wants to resolve to G7. So underneath we have the melody, and then you can be fancy and end with a C sus. So it sounds like this. Another song I like to use as an example is Amazing Grace. You remember we've played it very simply, just using 1, 4, and 5, or G, C, and D. Now let's add some sus chords in there to make it even more interesting. You can even start with 1, just to be fancy. And here, you can use C sus2, which quickly resolves to C, and then G sus2 here. Well, here you can actually use, this is A7 sus with a B in the melody, which quickly resolves to A7. And then you can put D sus here. You'll notice anytime you have a song like this that ends on a 5, when the phrase ends on a 5 and there's a big pause and you're getting ready to go into the next phrase, you can throw a sus chord in there. And then G sus here. Here add C sus2. Here you have your choice. You can do G sus or G sus2. Either one works. Whatever sounds good. Now here, there's our D7 sus with B in the melody, which resolves to D7, and then you can do something really fancy here at the end. G sus, G sus2, G sus, G. So it sounds like this. Or another famous hymn you can use to add sus chords to is What a Friend We Have in Jesus, in the key of F. And here's one of those examples where you have a phrase that ends on the 5. You can throw a sus chord in there. Now here's a few examples of popular songs that use sus chords. For example, if any of you know the old song, Cold as Ice by Foreigner, it starts out with this E sus, E minor, E sus, E minor. And I can't sing it, but that's how it starts. Anyway, it's full of sus chords. And then there's a famous song by Tom Petty. This is one of my favorites by him. And it starts out. She's a good girl, and so on. I love the lyrics in that first verse. They cracked me up. Anyway, you can go find this on YouTube to hear the whole thing, but it is chock full of sus chords. Then there's the famous song by The Who. And there is no way I can sing this, and it's very difficult to play this as a solo tune. But as you go through the verse, you find it goes from B sus to B, and then it goes to A sus to A, and then G sus to G, and then the deaf, dumb, and blind kid sure plays a mean pinball. Sounds better played on guitar by Pete Townsend, by the way. As you listen to popular music, you'll begin to hear the sus chord used, and it can be a very effective tool to make the chord progressions more interesting. I hope you found this helpful. Have some fun with these sus chords. See if you can spot them in the songs that you're listening to. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I look forward to speaking to you in the next one.
Oh, I
Excellent
totally
examples.
forgot about Cold as Ice and Pinball Wizard is so right. Like the Pinball Wizard, that one I wouldn't have thought like off the top of my head because the way that Elton rolls it, but seeing it and seeing the notation, I'm like, son of a bitch, that's such a slick way to just open the main chord to the sus chord to the main chord to the sus chord.
Yep. And doing it that way or the reverse way, like whichever way you choose to use it, going from the sus to the regular or from the regular to the sus, you get that motion. So it depends on whether you're trying to go that way or you're trying to go that way. So, going from the regular chord to the sus, to the sus4, you're going up. If you go to the 2, you're going down. But again, you can go anywhere you want. You can go down and then back up, go from the 2 to the 5. All kinds of options.
Yeah, I think what I like about the sus chord over the other ones, it has such beautiful resolution. Like all those different examples he was showing at the beginning, everything resolves perfectly in my ears.
Exactly. And the Pinball Wizard example, especially because it does go through several examples of, what do you say? It started on a B, let's say, B diminished or B sus and then a B and then A sus and then an A and then G sus and a G. So you're walking down. So like each of those, you're getting that nice little walk down feel the whole way. That's why you get that sense with those chords.
Yeah, that is a powerful technique for piano.
And great examples.
I want to master. Thank you so much for explaining that at home with music. 8698 over on YouTube.
Great job.
Yeah, that's I found another freshy piano channel.
Nice.
So now that we've gone through like all the typical chord examples, the one that we've mentioned, not just in tonight's show, but like all the time, 9th chords and 11th chords.
Yep. And someday we'll spring for a 13th, but not today.
Well, let's work our way up to the 13th.
Bit by bit.
Probably do a whole episode just on that.
Sure.
And this one's coming from Wuchia over on YouTube at Wuchia. Another one with a lot of theory. He used to do these 5-minute theory videos that have eventually stretched in order to like cover the all the different theory he does. 5 minutes can be difficult to explain some of these things, especially if you're talking about 11 types of 9th chords. And that's what he's really going to be showing is the 9th chord and different types and approaches to the ninth.
Very cool.
Something I figured would be Glenn approved.
It is indeed. And it's especially good when you're talking about, like, as you said, things like jazz or places where you're going to be using those chords. And a lot of times you might use these things and not realize that it's a ninth chord that you're using. But seeing how it's on the staff and seeing how, whether this is a guitar or piano focused, understanding how the chord is built is the important thing, because then no matter what instrument you have, you can translate it over.
Yeah. I wish I had gotten a chance to check this out before doing my jazz piece a couple weeks ago.
There you go.
Could have came in handy.
It's always good to know.
This is his 22nd video on music theory. He's got a whole series. If you're you want to get comfortable with theory and you want them in bite-sized, chunks, Wuchia is the one to go check out there.
Excellent.
Here it's going to be 11 types of ninth chords and how to use them.
Hi there, I am Wuchia and welcome back to yet another episode of Music Theory in 5 minutes. Using extended chord is a great way to add color to your chord progression. We already talked about triads and 7th chord in previous episodes, and now have come the time to speak about 9th chords. What are the different types of 9th chord and how to actually use them. As you probably already know, to build a chord, you basically take the notes of the scale you want to use, start with the notes you want to build the chord from, that's the notes that will give the chord its name, and then follow the notes of the scale, keeping one note every 2. If you keep 3 notes, you have a triad, which is made of a tonic, a third and a fifth. I'll leave a link in the description to the episode that talks about triads. If you keep 4 notes, you have a 7th chord, which is made of a tonic, a third, a fifth, and a 7th. I will also leave a link in the description to the episode that talks about 7th chord. And if you keep 5 notes, then you have a 9th chord, which is made of a tonic, a third, a fifth, a 7th, and a 9th. Then the nature of this 9th chord depends on the interval separating each note, and that is what we'll see now. There are many types of 9th chords, so we'll start with the most commonly used and then finish with the more rare ones. But just before we begin, I'd like to make 3 notes. First, one thing to keep in mind is that the more extension notes you add above the triad, the more color the chord has, but also the more tension you add, so generally these 7th and 9th notes needs to be resolved in one way or another. Second, this 9th note is actually the same note than the 2nd, but 1 octave higher. So it can introduce friction with the tonic and the 3rd as these notes are very close. To attenuate this friction, it is often advised to keep the 9th an octave higher, so it sounds smoother by letting the chord breathe. But there is no particular rule for that, so you do as you want really. And third, when you don't play the 7th of a chord, so you only have a triad with a 9th, we call that add 9. And generally this 9th is a major 9th. So we can have, for example, a C minor add 9, which is a C minor chord plus a major 9th. Or we can have, for example, a C add 9, which is a C major chord with a major 9th added. You'll see in a minute how you can use these chords, as they are only variations of other 9th chord I have on my list. So the first type of 9th chord we're gonna see is the dominant 9th, which is simply noted as 9. It is made of a major triad with a minor 7th, so that's a dominant 7th chord, to which we add a major 9th. So for a C chord that would be C, the major 3rd E, the perfect 5th G, the minor 7th B flat, and the major 9th D. This type of chord is often used as a dominant chord on the 5th degree of your tonality, so that would resolve well on a 1st degree, for instance. So in C major, for example, the 5th degree would be G, so the progression would be G dominant 9th to a C major chord. And in A minor, a 5 to 1 progression would make E dominant 9th to a minor chord. It is also a common practice to omit the 5th in a dominant 9th chord, so you would have only the tonic, the 3rd, the 7th, and the 9th. Now, to add more tension to this dominant 9th chord, you could alter it by lowering its 9th by a semitone. So the chord would be made by the same dominant 7th chord, but with a minor 9th added. This type of chord would be noted 7 flat 9. So for a C chord, it would be made of the root note C, the major 3rd E, the perfect 5th G, the minor 7th B flat, and the minor 9th D flat. And it would be used and resolved in the exact same way than the dominant ninth chord. So in the tonality of C major, that would make G7 flat 9 to a C major chord. And in a tonality of A minor, that would make E7 flat 9 to A minor. You could also alter the dominant ninth chord the other way around by moving the ninth upper semitone instead of down. That would make a 7th sharp ninth chord, which is built with a dominant 7th chord to which we add an augmented ninth. This chord is also known as the Hendrix chord, as it was made popular by Jimi Hendrix. We saw that in the episode about blues scale. So for a C chord, it would be made of the root note C, the major 3rd E, the perfect 5th G, the minor 7th B flat, and the augmented 9th D sharp. And again, it is used and resolved just like a dominant ninth chord. So in C major, that would make G7 sharp 9 to C major. And in A minor, that would make E7 sharp 9 to A minor. To sum it up, you can use a dominant 7th chord on the 5th degree on your tonality, to which you add either a major ninth, a minor ninth, or an augmented ninth, depending on the color you want to add to your chord progression. And that works well in either a major or minor tonality. Then you have a major ninth chord, which is made of a major triad with a major 7th and a major ninth. So that's a major 7th chord to which we add a major ninth. On a C chord, that would be made of the root note C, the major 3rd E, the perfect 5th G, the major 7th B, and the major 9th D. This is a type of chord you can use on the 1st degree or the 4th degree in a major tonality, but you can also use it on a 3rd and 6th degree of a minor tonality. Using the major 9th chord on these degrees would work better because it would use only the notes already in the scale you're using. So in the tonality of C major, that would mean using a F major 9th for the 4th degree or a C major 9th for the 1st degree. As an example, we can try a chord progression that goes from 1 to 4 and then 4 to 1. Or in the tonality of A minor, we can use a C major 9th chord on the 3rd degree or a F major 9th chord on the 6th degree, for example. So you could make this chord progression. The chord we commonly name minor ninth actually contains a major ninth. The minor ninth chord is made of the minor triad with a minor 7th and a major ninth, so it's like a minor 7th chord with a major ninth added. So on a C chord, that would be made of the root note C, the minor 3rd E flat, the perfect 5th G, the minor 7th B flat, and the major 9th D. That's a type of chord you can find in a major tonality on the 2nd degree and on the 6th degree, as building a 9th chord on these degrees using only the notes of a major scale would make a minor 9th chord, and in a minor tonality, this type of chord can be found on the 1st and 4th degrees. So in the tonality of C major, the 6th and the 2nd degree would be A minor and D minor. This type of chord seems to be a bit more efficient on a 2nd degree just before a 5th degree chord. So that would prepare a nice 2-5-1 chord progression if you want to resolve that progression totally. So we could make this chord progression. And in the tonality of A minor, for instance, the 4th and the 1st degree would be also a D minor and an A minor, which can go well together. Now we could have a minor triad with a minor 7th and a minor 9th. This type of chord would be noted as minor 7th, minor 9th. For a C chord, for example, that would be made of the root note C, the minor 3rd E flat, the perfect 5th G, the minor 7th B flat, and the minor 9th D flat. This is a type of chord you can find in a major tonality on the 3rd degree and in a minor tonality on the 5th degree. But it is less common in a minor tonality because for a 5th degree chord, a dominant 9th chord is often preferred. So in the tonality of C major, for example, the 3rd degree would be E minor. So we could make that a E minor 7th minor 9th chord. Then we can have a 9th chord built with a diminished triad with a minor 7th and a minor 9th. So it's like a half diminished 7th chord to which we add a minor 9th. I personally like to call this type of chord half diminished 9th, but it is often called simply diminished 9th, which I find a bit confusing. So to avoid confusion, we can call it a half diminished 7th minor 9th with this cross circle that means half diminished. Anyway, on a C chord, that would be the root note C, the minor third E flat, the diminished fifth G flat, the minor seventh B flat, and the minor ninth D flat. That's a type of chord you could find in a major tonality on the 7th degree, for instance, and in a minor tonality on the 2nd degree. But it is more used in minor tonalities, as the 7th degree in a major tonality can be analyzed as a 5th degree without the root note. The tension it brings to the chord progression is very similar. So let's see how it sounds in a minor tonality on the 2nd degree. In A minor, the 2nd degree would be B. So a B half diminished ninth would be made of the notes B, D, F, A, and C. So that's a lot of different ninth chords already and a lot of options to choose from. But almost all these chords can already be found in a major or minor tonality, as they only use the notes from the major and the natural minor scales. Now we are going to see some types of ninth chord that can be a bit trickier to use, and they use notes that are outside of the major and the natural minor scales. But most of these more rare ninth chords can actually be found in the harmonic minor scale. So more options to explore, but maybe a bit trickier to use. You can have what I like to call a fully diminished ninth chord. It is made of a diminished triad, a diminished seventh, and a minor ninth. So that's like a diminished seventh chord to which we add a minor ninth. To avoid confusion with the previous half diminished seventh minor ninth chord that is sometimes just called diminished ninth, we can call this one diminished seventh minor ninth. So for a C chord, that would be the root note C, the minor third E flat, the diminished fifth G flat, the diminished seventh B double flat, which is the same note than an A, and the minor ninth D flat. That is a very dissonant chord, as it contains two intervals of a triton and an interval of a minor second. This is a type of chord that is sometimes used in a minor tonality on the 7th degree. So in the tonality of A minor, there would be a G sharp diminished 7th minor ninth. The augmented ninth chord is made of a major triad with a major 7th and an augmented ninth. That can be noted +9 or augmented ninth. So for a C augmented ninth chord, that would be the root note C, the major third E, the perfect fifth G, the major 7th B, and the augmented ninth D sharp. That's a type of chord that is more often used in a minor tonality on the 6th degree. So in A minor, the 6th degree would be F, and we could have this chord progression. You could also have an augmented triad with a major 7th and a major 9th. That would be noted +7th, major 9th. So for a C +7 major 9th chord, that would be the root note C with the major 3rd E, the augmented 5th G sharp, the major 7th B, and the major 9th D. This is a type of chord you could find on the 3rd degree in a minor tonality. So this C +7 major 9th chord could be the 3rd degree in the tonality of A minor. And finally, you could have a minor triad with a major 7th and a major 9th. So that would be like a minor 9th chord we saw earlier, but with a major 7th instead of a minor one. And that can be noted as minor major 7, major 9. So for a C minor major 7th major 9th chord, that would be the root note C, the minor 3rd E flat, the perfect 5th G, the major 7th B, and the major 9th D. That's a chord that can be a substitute for the 1st degree in a minor tonality. So in the tonality of A minor, the A minor chord could be replaced by a A minor major 7th major 9th chord at some point. So that are 11 different types of 9th chord to experiment with in your compositions. That's a lot of options. But remember that your chords don't have to be all 9th chords. 9th chords are great to add color to a chord progression, but it may not be the color you want for each chord. So as always, just trust your ears. One way that can be good to voice this 9th chord is to have some notes clustered in the middle, with some notes a bit apart in the bass and some notes a bit apart in the higher notes. So you would have the color of a 9th chord in the middle, but with a more defined bass and a more defined melody. So that's all for me today. So if you like this video or found it useful, click the like button, and if you want to see more, check out my playlist of music theory in 5 minutes. And if you like what you see, consider subscribing. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
There is some math in
Lucia.
there.
Oh, that did extend my brain. I think it grew 3 sizes.
Helmets required.
I
Absolutely.
had no idea the ninth was like that versatile. When he got into the exotic stuff, I was like, wow, this is new territory.
Yep, and that was a thorough a thorough going over of that territory as well, which was awesome, and especially which cases or which places to make use of those things as well.
Yeah.
Excellent progression examples and where to use them in that that particular shot where you could see which ones were used in major, which ones were used in minor on which degrees. That was very useful information just to have around during songwriting.
Yeah, I love the visuals throughout all our videos tonight. So much easier to soak this stuff up when you can see it as well as hear it. And for him to actually like show the degrees, like you mentioned, the way he did was real useful to me. I was like, wow, I never really understood where chords like this should fit in that situation.
Yep. And when we talked about, or we started talking about seventh chords in the past, using 4 notes to make a seventh, a third, a fifth, a first, a third, a fifth, and a seventh. When you go to the ninth, you're just extending that to one further. And it commonly, as you mentioned, you leave out the 5 because that's the tone that's strongest or most implied. So you don't need it to be there to identify the chord. The third determines kind of the major or minor feel. The 7 can also determine major, minor, dominant of the feel. And then, you go from there. So then if you're going to add the 9, you can go like 1, 3, 7, 9. And that gets into categories of what we talked about with shell chords at one point as well, where you're just using a root, a third, a 7, and a 9, for example.
Well, I think looking at all his different options there, the 7th does play into the 9th a lot.
Oh yeah, basically the 7th is the key, is your key to get into any of the 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths. Because otherwise, as you mentioned, if it's just a triad, like a major triad with a 9, would just be a C add 9, because you're just adding a 9 to a C triad. It's when you're using the 7, you're kind of stepping your way there. Like the 7 is your key, and that lets you get into the 9s, 11s, and 13s. Without that 7 being in there, you're basically just adding a 9, adding an 11, adding a 13.
Yeah, and if you're using
the adding can also be called a 6, though.
If you're using these as like bridge chords, I mean, if you're utilizing the 7th wants to go up to that 8th, and if you're utilizing that 9th, the 9 wants to go down to the 8th.
Right. Exactly. And the thing is, the 9 could also want to go up to the 10, which gets you to that octave third.
Then you're a crazy composer.
Well, no, just saying that if you're on that, you got a C, C feel with a D on top. You go to that E on top, and it's still part of the same C major, but you getting that extra note up on the top. I like to just do a root and the 13th, or root and the 10th, which is a third up top.
Yeah, I guess it really depends on whether you want that chord, you're looking for resolution or build up. Like you're looking to push that chord to something higher and higher and higher.
Exactly. It's whether you're trying to build, whether you're trying to let it come back down, or whether you're just trying to, utilize a note and have it and not have it be too crowded. Because if you're, if I was trying to do that E on top, and I'm trying to do all these notes, it just sounds too chunky, right? But I can get the same implied feel with just that. That's a root and a third. So that's, it's a dyad. It's not even a full chord per se, but it is, implying C major because I'm playing a C and a high third.
Yeah, and I think appreciating these chords by like hitting each note, rolling up and down, helps a lot more than just trying to like hit all the notes at the same time. I understand why I've had a tough time utilizing a lot of this because I'm always thinking like hitting all the notes, but getting comfortable with the way they roll actually makes it easier to understand how they're going to sound when they hit together.
Yeah. And again, you don't have to use, the full chords at any time. You can even just use one of the notes and, use them as passing tones to get from here to there. And just, you're understanding that you're using it from this chord. So you could use the full chord if you want. You could use pieces of the chord, or you could just use individual notes that are going to be good because they're part of that note. You understand the theory of why that note works there.
Yeah. Yeah. That was an awesome walk through all our chords. Wuchia, glad to finally get this channel over to our subscription. He's got some great theory in there, and a welcome addition to our library of channels that we watch.
Yeah, and we're getting excellent recommendations in the feed. Good stuff.
Yeah, our YouTube's pretty smart these days.
Good stuff.
So if you want to learn any more theory or you want to get more comfortable with it, at Wuchia, go check them out. It's nice and digestible. A lot of this stuff we cover tonight might roll off of some people's attention spans. Theory is something that you have to want to explore. You can't have it like just shoved at you, because believe me, it didn't work for me as a kid. I had 15 years of theory in school and didn't appreciate it because I wasn't ready for it. But now, as you develop as a songwriter, as you learn to appreciate your instrument, the theory starts to come easier and make more sense.
One thing I would say is that it comes in layers. I would even put it. I mean, building a foundation, and then which things to build on top of that, and how to get everything all on top of each other to get it to build properly. So otherwise, you don't you have to understand why you're doing things to make it work or make it translatable. You know how to do it in C, fine. Can you do it in the key of F? And you're like, it's more complicated, but being able to translate and being able to utilize those rules in a different context is important.
Yeah, that's my next challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Implementation.
Exactly. But the other thing is, when it comes to songwriting, like for the longest time, I always just figured, one measure, one chord, right? It's just, we got the C, and then we got the G, and then we got the F, but using all of these as passing chords, whether it's a half a measure or a quarter of a measure, you can get a lot more done, because you can use these as flavor to get from place to place and to make your progressions more interesting, rather than just having, just a full block, 1, 4, 6, 5, whatever. Like you pick 4 numbers and a full measure of each, and you're done for the day. This makes it a little bit more interesting. You can have all these different ways of adding notes, even that you're not supposed to, and you'll find new and interesting ways to add notes you're not supposed to, and where to put them, by using this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's what a lot of these videos tonight did for me, is help me understand the importance of bridging your progression.
Exactly.
I'm ready to go implement it.
Yep, indeed.
I don't know if I'm ready to write blues yet, but I definitely am ready to do Mary Had a Little Lamb.
There you go. And I'm looking to go back and screenshot a couple of those spots to look at the charts, like the one where you had all the different ones laid out, the 11 different types of 9 chords. Because once you kind of have that listed there, and you kind of mess around with each of them, you see what that feels like, you'll see the places to use them, and you can try them in just even little test progressions to see how that works for you, or how you like the sound of that, and if it inspires some kind of a new sound, or that sounds like this song or that song, because you'll recognize that somebody used it somewhere, whether they knew it or not.
I definitely going to take a look for that chart for his. As a matter of fact, there's a couple of them throughout. I was like, oh yes, I would like to have that visual.
Exactly. And that's what we like to do here. Bring them all together in one place.
We check them out so you don't have to.
And then we make you watch it. And then we send you to their website.
We let you chat with us.
Yeah. And then we make sure we go to there.
Thank you to all who joined us over on the YouTube chat, and for joining us for exploring chords. That was a nice educational evening for me.
Absolutely. Me too. And a good complement to that would be something looking into stuff about like playing rhythm and what types of rhythms to play along with chords, to complement the different chords that you're going to be using. Now, how do you introduce new rhythm things with that, and also soloing techniques and how to solo over changes like this. So we'll look at things like that as well in some of the future episodes.
Oh yeah, a solo night, soloing. Definitely got to have that one soon.
Definitely. But thanks everybody for joining us. I think that was our last video for the evening, so we're going to be checking out. But we'll be here again next time, and don't forget the helmets. And we'll be here. People will be here tomorrow as well.
Yeah, I was born with a helmet.
Yeah, there you go. So don't crash. But thanks for talking. Shh. IT with Glenn and Tony.
That
See y'all. Ambient noise, yeah.
So now you're grabbing some band lab clips.
Now for me, that would also be something where I would use like volume automation and like bring that from the bottom, like bring it in and then bring it back out.
And these are the kinds of sounds you can scratch. With this AI, like scratching it actually can be cool.
Oh, that was perfect for the interlude too.
Ends it right in the right
I
spot.
didn't even notice 40. I didn't even realize the texture faded out at the interlude until it happened. I'm like, wait a minute.
Sometimes you just, it was just meant to be that way.